and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And we have an interesting show this evening. We have Grant Cameron coming up. We're going to be talking about not just the presidential UFO thing, but a bunch of other stuff, too, he wanted to speak about. And before that, we have Alejandro Rojas coming up with the UFO updates in just a couple of minutes. Thank you for supporting the show. If you're helping us out for only $2 or more per month, you can help pay for some of that bandwidth that we have cranking up here. And I appreciate if you can help. If you can't, you can still listen to the show for free every Wednesday at 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Podcast UFO and PSN Radio. You can also listen to the full entire show on the Dark Matter Digital Network. That's every Thursday at 10 to midnight. That's Eastern Standard Time. All right, that's enough for me. How you doing, Alejandro?
I am well. How are you, my friend?
Doing great tonight.
Good.
I'm excited. Good. Sometimes you get excited to do a show. Sometimes, you're like, huh. But and a lot of times it has nothing to do with the guests. It's just how your mood is, and I'm just in a great mood. So
yeah, sometimes you have low energy. I'm usually pretty excited still, even if I have low energy, especially if you have the right guest. First of all, they could perk you up.
That's true.
And make you happy. Or you can just be like, okay, you ask a few questions and they kind of let them take charge and give the information.
Yeah.
Which I don't mind anyway.
I don't mind either, but you have to stay on your toes because
you do.
Yeah, you can easily they can all of a sudden say, "You know what I'm talking about?" And then you say,
what? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm always in the conversation, but plus you got to be ready to have the BS card ready.
That's true.
Just
almost the drop button. So what's going on for UFO news?
Yeah. Oh, there's some UFOs out there. So let's see. Of course, the tabloids are still running BS, just to keep everybody up to date on that. I don't think there is one that kind of made some news, though, in Bolton, a town of Bolton. And actually, I'm going to be writing that up. And in fact, let me write that up, and I'll give you more information on that next week. I'll probably have the story up later today. But
all right,
just people might have heard of this video in Bolton. And I'll explain it. We do have it in our daily headlines, and I'll hopefully have this story up by the end of the day, hopefully by the time your show's over. But essentially, these people have their security camera up, and during this short video, they were looking at their security camera because it's a motion detector on their cars, and they were in the UK, and they were afraid of someone breaking in or something. The camera comes on for a little while. It's only like 40 seconds or so. A lot of people are like, where's the rest of the video? But there is no more video. What triggered the camera, they're not sure. They say probably their cat. But what's interesting is over the rooftops, you see about 20 seconds into the video, in between a couple of the rooftops, there's a white orb that kind of goes by. At first, you're kind of like, oh, maybe it's just a meteorite. But then you see it come on, behind another house, and then it turns and goes in front of that house, and then the video ends. So very, very strange orb video.
Especially when something turns, when you can explain away a lot of like the straight line movement of lights or what may look like an orb. But when it turns, it becomes a lot trickier to...
Then you got to say WTF. That is strange AF.
That's right.
See, And by the way, I don't say bad words. So when I say AF or WTF, I mean what the frick. Or that is crazy. AF is as flip.
Yeah.
So just I don't mean the other word. I mean flip typically when I refer to F.
I see.
Just so people know.
Yeah. Just in case your kids are listening, we're all set with that. Yeah.
There's a couple other crazy AF videos out there though too, at least pictures.
All right. Well, let's hear about them.
Yeah, one of these is in Washington, D.C. This is a Roger Marsh story. He's the director of MUFON, or director of communication for MUFON, who writes for us MUFON cases. And this is a worm-like object that this person said was hovering in the sky at about 40 feet. It almost looks like a balloon, like those long balloons you make animal shapes with, but it's no real shape you can distinguish. But this was about 11 a.m. on October 2nd. This person saw this up in the sky, kind of freaked out and said, "What the heck is that?" He said he ran over, he took a couple of pictures, then ran over to get a better picture closer to the object, and the object was gone. It disappeared. He called it a worm-like shape, and you can kind of see what it means. Somebody kind of being funny said it looks like the symbol for formerly known as the symbol that Prince used for his name for a period of time. But it is a really strange picture of some object floating. You can see a apartment complex close to the person, and it's just past that. So it's not too high in the sky. But yeah, it's pretty weird one.
Yeah, I looked at that, and I know it looks. I think this is last week you did a report on like another biomorphic type shape thing, and that's kind of what this looks like too.
Yeah, really strange. There was another one in Colorado, Superior, Colorado, which is near Boulder. This person said he caught 5 metallic-like objects on his photograph. He felt that the object was about 30,000 feet. Not sure how this person determined that, but these objects are really weird. They kind of look like something that is reflective. To me, they look more translucent, but perhaps it's because they're far away. This person felt that they look like they were metal. But this person said they seem to fluctuate in brightness. He said potentially from changing its position with respect to the sun, which it does seem to be the bright spots are reflections. They said that this was, they were able to use their digital zoom to get the picture. They used a Nikon SLR. They took the pictures of the objects, and then the objects disappeared, they say. So did you see those pictures?
I did not, but this kind of reminds me when I was helping with your show yesterday. You jokingly said, keep your eyes, since I was outside.
Oh, yeah.
Look up at the sky. And then I said, right after we quit recording, I said, you're not going to believe this, but I see something in the sky, a bright light. And I realized that what it was the reflection of the sun, which was going down probably off of an airplane, because it disappeared also. So I'm wondering if that's kind of, I'm not saying it is for sure, but I'm wondering if it's possible that's what they were seeing.
Could be. I don't know what the heck. It's like I said, it's strange AF. So really weird one. I'll just throw another one in there if that's okay.
Yeah.
West Virginia, Barber County, another MUFON case. 4 lights in a triangle shape, says the witness. They posted a video. People on YouTube looked at the video and said this is lame AF, and the reason why is because it's a very poor video, and this person says he has a crappy Android that doesn't take good videos. But luckily this person took pictures, and in the story Roger posted, he put the pictures in there. So the video is not very impressive at all. You would just think it's Venus or something this guy is mistaking for something strange. He took this video at 6:18 a.m. when he got up and was at work. Him and his coworkers were on this hill, and they were getting their machinery out, not sure what he does, to do their job when he saw it. This was on September 5th. It was still dark out. And the pictures are strange. So we took these pictures and zoomed in, and he's like, what the heck is this? And one of the pictures, you can see that this is not just one light in the sky. You can clearly see it's 4 lights. 3 of those lights are in a line, and then one of the lights is below the light on the left. And so it is sort of a triangular shape. So this is weird. You know, with just looking at the video alone, I can see why the people on YouTube were saying this is stupid. But when you look at the pictures, it is really strange. So another good one, some strange stuff Roger has been getting out of the MUFON files here.
Yeah, I know a lot of times the videos just do not do any justice to what you're seeing, no matter what you're videoing. On a phone, and that technology is going to get better, I know. So, all for the future, we'll have better videos in the future. I would imagine. I should
probably,
yeah,
if we make it. Maybe like hollow cameras. Do you think that would be something in the future?
Wait a minute. Did you just say if we make it?
If we make it, yeah.
Through the bottleneck of technology, as they say.
Yeah, I mean, you know, with all the nukes out there, and it's a dangerous world, my friend, a dangerous world.
It is. On that note, do you have anything else, or is that it?
Well, I don't want to leave on a sad note. What would be something happy I could say? Things don't want to bring up politics. That's not happy.
All right, well, I got an idea.
The weather's great out here.
That's right. It's a really good time of year for weather out there.
Yeah.
But let me just ask you this. I know February's a long way off.
It is.
But I'm still excited already for coming out that way.
Oh, yes.
Have you had any new guests since the last time you brought up the guest list?
I don't know. That's a good question because I can't remember when I brought out the guest list last. I think I did tell you about John Alexander. It's funny. There was one person who posted and said, oh, your lineup looks awesome. It's incredible. I'm so excited. But why the heck are you having John Alexander? He's a disinformation agent. Blah, blah, blah. But what's interesting, and it's frustrating that people say stuff like that because you know, just because someone has a different point of view, however, and some of your listeners are going to be like, he's right, he is. Well, then prove it. Tell me what makes you feel this way, except for it's just your opinion because of what he says. I don't feel that anything he's saying is so extraordinarily outlandish that it's not outside the realm of possibility. Essentially, that the Air Force doesn't know what they're doing and they don't know what the heck to do about UFOs. But this is what's great is that he actually, for the first time, is going to be speaking about his own sighting. And so that's pretty cool. And what's weird is says it has to do with like healings and all of this other weird stuff. So it's going to be kind of cool. But otherwise, I don't think I even have this person posted yet. But we have confirmed, and I need to do that, Erling Strand. So he is a professor from the University of Norway who has been investigating the Hesdalen lights. And what's great is that, you know, they've been looking at it as possibly a plasma sort of phenomena. He says, no, this isn't plasma. This is much stranger. And he feels that it does appear to be intelligently controlled. So he's going to give more information to that effect. Really great guy. He was at MUFON. I got to meet him at the MUFON Symposium, and we're super excited to have him participating in the 2017 UFO Congress.
Right. All right, that's great. Thanks so much, and we'll be talking to you next week.
All right, talk to you soon, buddy.
All righty. All right, hang in, everyone, for the quick music break. We'll be right back with Grant Cameron.
We'll be right back with Grant Cameron.
That music is by Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse, probably for some movie that he has written that for or something, but he's given us all his music to play here and there. And we have a few other people that are giving us some music coming up soon. We have Grant Cameron on now. Welcome to the show, Grant.
Welcome. Thank you very much for having me on, Martin. I appreciate it.
Yes, I think I didn't look on my show, but I think it's been a few years. I think you were only on for a short stint catching up on something you were doing, I think, at the time.
Then we'll have lots to talk about.
Yeah, that's right. And I did get to meet you last year over in Maine. You made a trip.
Yes.
And you are in Canada, right?
Yes, right in the middle, right above North Dakota, right? It's famous for being the coldest city in the world. There's actually a spot on Mars where during one point it was colder here than it was on Mars. So apparently there's a spot on Mars that's called Winnipeg.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. I had no idea that's where you were. Oh, my God. I've heard about the winters there. Wow. Yeah, something else. So, Grant, for the person that has not heard you, I think most people listening probably know about you. I know you had a sighting back in the 1970s and that changed everything and all that. And just to let the listener know, we have some questions that came in that I'd like to ask you during the first part of the show, and then we'll get into other things that you would like to talk about. You sent me a list of a few things interesting. Yeah. But can you give the listener that may not have heard you before kind of a quick nutshell of who you are and what got your interests perked up in UFOs?
Okay, I've been in it since 1975. I had a whole series of sightings in 1975. The only reason I ever got involved in UFOs was there's a small town called Carmen, Manitoba, which is about 25 miles from the North Dakota border, just above where all the Minuteman missile silos were. And this town was being inundated from about February till about November of 1975. And the only reason I went out there was because I wanted to see what everybody was seeing. I had no interest in UFOs. I'd never thought about extraterrestrial life. And I went out there to see what everybody's looking at, thinking I bought the lottery ticket and there's a chance you can win, but you're not going to win. And I could not believe that this thing flew right in front of the car, down low, pretty close to the car. It was not a light in the sky. It was an object. And it changed my life. I started to gather all the sightings after the second night. I went back 2 nights later, had an encounter where this thing came right at us the second night, and it was in fairly close again. And at that point, I decided that this was pretty bizarre, that why is somebody not talking to the people in the town? Because the rumor was, and it was true, that half the people in the town had seen this thing over this 1 year period. And gathered all that material together, tried to get it published, and the local publisher who should have published it, because it was a famous story around here, said, Mr. Cameron, you may believe in this kind of stuff, count me among non-believers. And at that point, I said, this is a total waste of time. And I completely lost any interest in sightings, and I was just interested in what was it that I had seen, and who in the world had the answer to what I'd seen. So that's the from say 1977 until now, that has been my pursuit, is to find out who's got the answer, who should we be listening to, and my sort of underlying belief that somebody has to know what's going on.
Yeah, I wonder that. I have said a few times on the show too that perhaps they know something, like, say, let's just say some part of the U.S. government, will agree and knows that something is going on. But the thing that I've wondered is perhaps they really don't know exactly what it is, but want to keep it quiet because if they don't know, they wouldn't know how to tell the public.
I used to believe that. I don't believe it anymore. I absolutely believe they know. And the whole catch to the cover-up is that they want you to think they don't know because, as I say, if you look behind the cover, behind the curtain, it is the President of the United States who is running the cover-up. He is in charge of everything. He is the guy who runs the military. He runs the intelligence. He's the head of the executive branch of the government. If you're dealing with foreign power, with aliens, he's the head of state. You cannot have anybody negotiate except for the head of state. Constitutionally, he's in the loop. So I believe now is that the president knows. It's unacknowledged special access, which means not only is it secret, they can't even acknowledge there's a program, because to acknowledge that a program is just to invite more questions. So you can't talk about it. You have to deny it exists. And you and I say as a broadcaster, if you knew the president was running the show, you and 2,000 other reporters would descend on the White House lawn and start asking him questions. But if you think that it's the evil cabal, or it's the Illuminati, or it's the Wizard of Oz that's running the cover-up, there's nothing you can do, because you can't interview those people. That's just this illusion type thing that I believe they're trying to put out there, is that, as Bill Clinton said, and if you look at when Bill Clinton was asked a question, there was a review done by Ben Hansen, who did Fact and Faked. He worked for the FBI,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
and he can do all the, the motions and what people's reactions are and how they respond. And his analysis was that Bill Clinton was being deceptive. And Bill Clinton was saying, I'm not probably the first president that the bureaucrats have kept in the dark, and that bureaucrats have tried to wait out and all this kind of stuff, that I really didn't know what was going on. And when you review that thing, it looks like he's being deceptive. And that's the party line. That is, Barack Obama said, that's what we're told to say when he says it in a joking manner. And that's because everybody knows where the president lives. If you suddenly realize, if it suddenly becomes known that the president has been briefed, then wow, this thing's for real. You don't brief the president on something that doesn't exist. And everybody knows, I know the president's phone number. I actually know his actual phone number to get into the president's line and to the switchboard at the executive office. This is not an unknown number, and everybody knows where he lives. And you end up in a position, if it becomes known the president's briefed, that he starts facing questions. And this almost happened. In May of this year, I thought the cover-up was over. I thought we were days away from the cover-up, because what had happened is that Hillary Clinton had not talked about UFOs, as a lot of people put out. She'd answered 3 questions. She had been set up. John Podesta had set this thing up to get the reporters to ask her about aliens. So she was asked 3 questions, and she answered them honestly. She answered them clearly. And this started sort of a firestorm of stories about Hillary's going to disclose and all this kind of stuff. And nothing happened until May the 10th of this year, when the New York Times did a straight-up piece on UFOs and Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton's going to disclose. And that sort of broke the dam. As soon as the New York Times did it, it was like, well, this is a real newspaper. It doesn't really matter if, some little rinky-dink podcast puts it out, or some little newspaper puts it out. But the New York Times is actually doing a story where they're questioning, is Hillary going to disclose this thing? And that started this sort of, what I've always said has to happen, is you had the White House press reporters who will not ask a UFO question. And that is because if you are, say, working for the NBC or for Fox or something, and you go ask the dumb UFO question, you embarrass the network. And the president calls on people. So the president may decide that you've embarrassed him, that you don't want that they don't want this question asked. So you end up back, doing court reporting. And you lose your thing. And what happens is, if you're in the White House press corps, you want to be respectable. You want to ask the question about, the economic situation of Afghanistan or some, make it sound like you're smart. You want to ask those kind of questions. You don't want to ask the dumb UFO question. And the last time, before this happened in May, when all these questions started to be fired, before that, the last time that a White House press secretary had taken a question on UFOs was in 1997, when Webster Hubbell came forward. He wrote a book, Friends in High Places. Mm-hmm. He's the one that came out and said, before Bill was elected, when he was president-elect, he had said to him, if I put you over than justice, I want you to find out the answer to 2 questions. Number 1, are there UFOs, and who killed JFK? And he said, I couldn't get proper answers. So he puts this in the book, and Deborah Orrin, who worked for the New York Post, and you have newspapers, no matter what people say. There are conservative newspapers, and there's, like Republican newspapers, and there's Democratic newspapers, and the New York Post is a pro Republican newspaper, and she hated the Clintons. She put out the Monica Lewinsky story, so she's the one that asked the question in 1997 of the press secretary and said, Webster Hubbell has talked about Bill sending Webster out to look for UFOs. Is this true? And the press secretary evaded it. And he talked about this Palode, this famous Weekly World News alien. He said, no, we gave that job to the alien. And so he walks around her question. So she comes back with a follow-up question. She said, is it true what Mr. Hubbell writes in his book? And then the press secretary says, I will not comment on what private people put in their private books. So he walks around the question. And Deborah Orrin, in a later interview, said, I sat there and waited for the rest of the White House press corps to follow up. And they all just rolled over and played dead. And the reason they played dead is because nobody wants to ask the stupid questions. So they got away with it. Westerhuvel put this in his book, and nobody ever brought it up. And nobody ever forced the White House to answer the question. Before that, the question that was asked was President Eisenhower in January of 1954 took a question. It was 54. Yeah, I think it was January of 1954. Between those times, there's been no question asked to the White House. So what happens in May the 10th, New York Times does this piece, and suddenly everybody gets religious in the White House press corps. And they suddenly, okay, now it's permissible because the White House, the New York Times has done a story, so now we can ask the question. And these were major reporters. So the one was with Yahoo News, one was, I think, ABC, and the third one was with an African-American reporter for some African-American news outlet. And the first question came and said, the White House, the New York Times has put out this story about Hillary going to disclose, and this is a serious issue that people are interested in. And I want to know, is Barack Obama going to beat Hillary to the punch and disclose? And the White House press secretary gets saved because, of course, he doesn't have a clearance. So that's what he says. He said, I don't have a clearance. I don't have a tab in my briefing book for that. I don't have a clearance. But the president has jokingly indicated that his job gives him access to that kind of material. You should ask him. It'll be interesting. I couldn't believe it when he said, you should ask him. It'll be interesting. He basically rats out the president. He throws the president under the bus and says, ask the president. And that's what I've been saying for years. That's what you've got to do. The president knows, and you've got to ask him the briefing question. What's going on? So then the second question comes up, and it's the same sort of thing. It's the same question, and he walks around the question again. And then on the 16th, the questions were asked, like May 10th was the article. May the 11th, 2 questions were asked by the White House press corps. And you could tell the questions were serious questions. There was no little green men. There was no laughing, whatever. They were serious questions. Is this thing for real? Hillary's talking about this thing. Does the president get briefed? Is this thing for real? And the press secretary just walks around it by saying, I don't have a clearance for that. And so then on the 16th, this African-American reporter, Diane, I can't remember her name is, she says, okay, what about Roswell? Did Roswell really happen? What's the deal? Is this classified? Is this trying to keep this away from the people? And then I can't remember what the guy's name is, the press secretary starts going for a drink of water as she's asking the question. And she says to him, look at that. You're doing the dance. You're doing the dance at the podium. You're getting a drink of water. You're trying to figure out what you're going to say to walk around the question. And then he says, you just keep trying. And so basically he puts her off. But you can see that the reporters have suddenly decided this thing's for real. There's some truth to this. And they start asking this question. The only thing that solved it was that the person who had the need to know, the president of the United States at that time, was in Japan. And so it was a week before he came back. And by that time the week was over, the press had all gone back to sleep again. And they basically didn't have the question, or Barack Obama didn't take the question from those 3 reporters. So it basically came down to this position where if the president had taken a news conference the day after this all happened, he would have faced the briefing question. And Barack Obama, compared to Bill Clinton, Barack Obama has never, I'll maintain, he's had a lot of comments on UFOs. He has never lied. He has walked around it by making jokes and stuff, but he has never openly lied the way Bill Clinton does when Bill Clinton answers the question. So you're going to have a situation where I say if you have a high-level official, a vice president, a president who may have gotten the briefing, the vice president may have got the briefing. The president for sure has the briefing. Or a 4-star general, the Unified Command, will have had the briefing. So this is the question that you've got to ask him. And that's the question I asked Dick Cheney, the briefing question. You don't care if they're interested in UFOs. You don't care if they've seen a UFO. Who cares? The only question you want to ask him is, did you get briefed? That's the answer. Is, did someone walk in your office, swear you to secrecy, and then tell you what was going on? Because the 17 intelligence agencies that work all they do is one job. They provide the best intelligence possible for the people at 60,000 feet. And that's the president. That's his executive branch people. That's the head of the intelligence for the Senate and the House. That's the people that they provide the best intelligence. So when a person gets a briefing, the top intelligence people on that subject will go in, they'll swear you to secrecy at whatever level that secrecy is, and they will tell you the truth. That's the truth. So that's the question I asked Dick Cheney, because the rumor always was that Dick Cheney was MJ-12 guy. He was like the really powerful guy. And Bush actually had said, Cheney knows about it. He knows it's the first thing he's going to do when he gets to the White House. So he gets to the White House. It's April 11th, 2001. He's on a radio talk show in Washington on the Diana Rehm show. I know how to get in on the show. I know how to get on the phone. I know how it works. So I set this thing up. I'm the first caller in, and I ask him, Mr. Cheney, in all your jobs in government, have you ever been briefed on the subject of UFOs? If so, when was it, and what were you told? And he was caught off guard. You could tell he was caught off guard. He said, if I had been briefed on that subject, it would probably be classified, and I wouldn't be talking about it. That's the truth. That's how it works. It's classified, and I wouldn't talk about it. And so that's where it comes down, where I thought there was going to be disclosure, and they sort of walked around it again, and now we're back to this sort of situation of waiting for someone to ask the question. Because you can ask the question of the Secretary of Defense, he may not know. You can ask the CIA guy, he may not know. You can ask a lot of people. The only person for sure that I would say knows, that nobody's going to tell me differently, that doesn't know, is the president. Because constitutionally, and I'm a Canadian, so we see this with Americans, except for maybe Donald Trump, are absolutely anal about the Constitution. I mean, you got your First Amendment right to free speech, you got your Second Amendment right to bear arms, your Fourth Amendment right against search and seizure, and Americans are just like talking about this Constitution. In Canada, you ask about the Constitution, they'll say, what Constitution? Like nobody has any idea about it. Nobody's read it. Nobody cares about it. And in the United States, everybody's into that thing. So the whole point is that if you have these high-level officials, they are very aware of the Constitution. And that's why you have situations that show that this is for real, that if the president needs to know, he's going to be told. You have this thing with the nuclear footballs, that there are 2 nuclear footballs, these things that these satchels that are carried around by the sort of a guy that follows the president around. He's always within reach of the president. And this is, so if there's a nuclear war, the president has like 30 seconds or 60 seconds to decide what he's going to do. There's no conversation with anybody else. He basically makes the decision what he's going to do. And he's got all the codes in this satchel. There are 2 of them. One is carried with the vice president. One's carried with the president, because this is constitutional thing that if the president dies, you have to have somebody who's within a couple of seconds of launching a nuclear attack. And the same as when the president gets elected on the day of the inauguration, there are 2 footballs. One for the incoming president, one for the outgoing president, because there's this anal constitution thing that there may be 30 seconds when there isn't a president. And so it comes down to this thing where you have to have these 2 footballs. And so if you see if they're that anal about the Constitution and about following it to the letter of the law, there's no way that you're going to have some GS-13 down in the bottom of the State Department negotiating with Greys or aliens or whoever this consciousness is. It has to be the president. If it's a foreign power, the president is constitutionally the guy in charge, the same as he's the head of the military. If the military is covering up, it's all going up to him. All the intelligence agencies report to the president. That's what they do. They don't sell Trump steaks. They don't sell cars. All they do is one thing: provide the best intelligence for the president. So that's a long answer to your question.
Yeah, well, I've got a scenario that I want to run by you on this.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say we know that Bill Clinton was in office, and then if that is true, what you said, of course, he was sworn to secrecy, not to talk about it and all that. Well, he is married to Hillary, and why wouldn't they have the conversation behind closed doors? Look, don't bother getting into this because it's going to go nowhere. You're going to be briefed on it, and you're going to be sworn to secrecy. That's the type of thing that I would see if it follows what you're saying, like the president is briefed on it, sworn to secrecy. I would think that he would say, hey, Hillary, don't even talk about the UFO. If someone asks you something about the UFO topic, just move on to something else.
You're saying Bill would say that to her?
Yeah, because he knows the brick wall. I'm saying now, like before she came out in May and started talking about it, or was asked questions and answered questions about it. Okay. If Bill knows that it's a brick wall and can't go anywhere, why wouldn't he share that with his wife and say, don't even go there?
okay, because it wasn't her decision. It was John Podesta's decision. And things have changed. That's what I would say has happened. Things have changed. There's always been this idea. In fact, I think Dolan talks about this. There's a disclosure event that was going to take place with George Bush in August of 1991 after the Russia fell. There was this, you'll read it in Dolan's book. There's a few people talk about this disclosure thing where they were going to do the disclosure thing. They had Kenny Bunkport. They had Bush at Kenny Bunkport. They had all these people. It was all set up, and they were going to go do the briefing, and they needed the vote. They figured the vote was, there was 16 people or something like that, and they figured they had 8 votes or something, and they get the other 8 votes, and it was all set up, and just when they went, the vote went exactly the opposite way. So that's, if you hear Hillary talk about it, in one of the statements when Hillary talks about it, she says, if I can get agreement, and that skips by everybody. She says, if I can get agreement, which means, and she knows how it works. So she's saying, if I can get agreement, so it means that she's got whatever the thing is, whether it's the MJ-12 committee, whether it's the head of national intelligence, the NSA, CIA, a group of those type of people that all get together. There's a vote. So I think the vote has changed. I think the vote used to be like if it's MJ-12, it was 12-0, then it was 10-2 and 8-4. And I think the vote is now in the opposite direction, where they have decided, and I've heard this from behind closed doors, that they are making a move. They just don't know how to get this thing out. They want to, the one statement I was told is you want it out, but you don't want the government's fingerprints on it. And I said, well, good luck with that. But in one case where Hillary's actually asked about it, she's asked about the Bill Clinton thing when she's on the Kimmel show. And Kimmel always has this joke, if I had my hand on the Bible, my hand would still be hot coming off the Bible, and I'd be heading to the White House to find out what's on with the situation with the UFOs. And he says, I had your husband on here. And he said, I didn't know. I couldn't find out anything. So what about you? And what she says, she starts the answer immediately. And if you look at Hillary's answer, she's very direct on these things. She's not hedging like Bill's. She's not hemming and hawing. She goes directly to it, but the people start laughing, so she stops. And she said, well, I'm going to do it again, which is completely different than Bill. Bill saying I couldn't find anything. And she said, well, I'm going to look again. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to make the review again, as if there is a plan. The same as John Podesta. And I maintain this. People will argue with me. I absolutely maintain. John Podesta, this all started when Hillary did, during the campaign, she did an interview with Lena Dunham. So she does this interview with Lena Dunham, and this is when John makes the famous tweet. Now, John Podesta, you got to remember, John Podesta calls himself, he likes to be part of the cult of non-personality. John Podesta is not in front of the camera. He doesn't want to talk to anybody. He's the guy, the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, pulling the strings. And he's in charge of the whole Hillary Clinton campaign. He's running the show, but you're never going to see the guy. The odd time he'll be interviewed, somebody will track him down, whatever. He doesn't want to be in the forefront. So he very rarely tweets. But he tweets when Lena Dunham does the interview. He says, good interview, Lena. Next time, ask her about the aliens. When I saw that, I knew something was up. I mean, really, this is really something. Because what you got to remember is because he's the head of the Hillary Clinton, he's the chairperson of the Hillary Clinton campaign, he is in charge of the whole operation. And everything I maintain, everything in a presidential campaign, except maybe Trump's campaign, is done by focus groups. And in fact, Trump actually makes jokes about Hillary with the focus groups. That what you do is you take an issue and you put it in front of a focus group, and you everybody's got the little counters, and you watch whether the number's going up or down or whatever. And if the number goes up, that's something we're going to talk about. If the number goes down, you stay away from this subject. And so that's what they do. They put everything in front of focus groups. So when John Podesta says to Lena Dunham during a presidential campaign that is going to cost $1 billion, where if it goes south, for example, if suddenly she started talking about UFOs and suddenly everybody wrote her off like Kucinich in 2008, and suddenly she drops 20% in the polls, John Podesta would go down in history as the most stupid man in the entire world. So I say there is no doubt that this issue, the UFO issue, was put in front of a focus group. John would not have asked a reporter during a major presidential campaign to ask about aliens unless he knew that the numbers went up when the people pushed the counters, that this was a positive issue and it would not hurt like it did Kucinich in 2008. Right. And that's exactly what's happened. It hasn't gone south. People have said, well, why isn't she getting attacked? Because they put it in front of a focus group. It's not that big a deal. People aren't really interested, and it's not the toxic issue it used to be. So it's John Podesta that's behind this whole thing. He did the initial tweet in 2015, the day before he leaves the Barack Obama administration. It's a very famous and a very important tweet where he says, once again, and that's important. When you read John Podesta, he is the smartest guy in the room. He is the smartest Democrat, the most powerful Democrat there is. He's the wheeler and dealer in the Democratic Party that's running the whole show. So when you see his tweets, you got to read every word he says, and he's being very careful about what he says. He says, once again, my biggest disappointment, which means he's done this before. He tried to get Bill to disclose. He couldn't get Bill to disclose. And then he says, once again, my biggest disappointment of 2014 was not getting UFO disclosure. He says this the day he's leaving the Barack Obama administration, sort of putting himself on the record, because the Washington Post that actually put a story, because I was following all his FOIA stuff, they said, John, you're in this box now. As soon as Barack Obama leaves the administration, you're going to be asked about all the correspondence between Barack Obama and Podesta on UFOs. So he's putting himself on the record. Okay, here's the record. I asked a question. And he confirmed that to this rock star guy that's running around, Tom DeLonge. Tom DeLonge confirms that Podesta did talk to Obama about UFOs. So this is this whole thing that he said, once again, my biggest disappointment was not getting UFO disclosure. So when Hillary comes in, then you see what the conversation is. In the interview that John does in Las Vegas with Knapp's people at KLS TV, he says, he said, I think I've convinced her. She has to look at the material and disclose what she can. Now, that's very important. When you listen to John, you listen to every word he's saying. So he says, I think I convinced her, which means I couldn't convince Bill to do it. I couldn't convince Barack Obama to do it, but I've convinced Hillary to do it. And then he says she's going to take the material and look at it and disclose as much as she can, which means there's a process. It's not the evil cabal, the Wizard of Oz running the cover-up. It's the president knows. Hillary will get the material in front of her. She'll look at it, and she will disclose as much as she can. And that's exactly what Hillary has said. Okay. If it's not national security, I will release the material. So she is admitting that she will have access to the material.
Now, have you ever spoken or communicated in any type of way with Podesta?
No.
You haven't? Okay, that was just a quick question. We do have a message board, by the way, and people listening live do post questions. And I have another one right after that. But what were you saying?
Yeah, he does. As I said, he says he's part of the cult of non-personality. He does not get dragged in. He deals with Leslie Kean.
Right.
But I don't think Leslie Kean even has any position, because that's not the way John operates. John, when he wants to do something, he will suddenly appear with a tweet. Otherwise, he's the last guy you're ever going to get to interview.
Yeah. Kean also said that she thought he was joking, but there's a lot of people that disagree with that. Okay, so one of the we have a listener down in, I think it's Tasmania or down that way somewhere. He was wondering, why is it just up to the U.S.? What about all the other countries that know something's going on?
Okay, when I first had my UFO sighting, I went to investigate the Canadian government, and the guy that ran the Canadian government program was Wilbert Smith.
Wilbert Smith, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we recovered all his government stuff, which is access to everybody. But we also recovered all his private material, and that's like 10,000 pages of material or whatever. It's at the University of Ottawa. So we saw all that material. There's a letter from 1956 written to a guy by the name of Caswell. He said, just for your information, every nation of the world has been informed of the existence of the ETs, or however he phrases it, and each government it is up to them to decide what they're going to do. So that's a guy who ran the Canadian government UFO program, who basically says they all know. It always comes down to the thing where it's always the bottom line to this thing is military weapon secrets. It's lead time. That the farther you can get ahead of your opponent, the better you are in terms of weapons. So if you, for example, the atomic bomb is the example I always use. So in World War II, the Americans dropped the atomic bomb, and then, of course, they go running to the emperor in Japan and say, well, just dropped this atomic bomb, killed 100,000 people, and we got to fight back. And, of course, the emperor says, okay, just build one of these bombs and we'll drop it on them. And how long is it going to take? And, I don't know, about 8 years. you can't. That's what lead time is do with weapons. So the way the game is played is that all the major powers either control the smaller countries, or the big powers. It becomes a game of who's going to put the cards down first. So if, for example, you have 80%, you're the Americans, you have 80% of the secret, and you put your cards down, and the Russians have 80%, and you suddenly give the Russians the 20% they need, then they say, okay, we decide we're not going to disclose, and they've got the 100%, and you've got 80%. And so it comes down to a game of chicken, who's going to put the cards down first. And I'll give you an example of how that worked. One of the people who helped brief Bill Clinton's science advisor was Scott Jones. Now, Scott Jones worked as an advisor on the staff of Claiborne Pell, who was the head of foreign relations, top-ranking senator in the United States. And he tells a story. I don't know how many times he's told it publicly, but he told me publicly or privately. He told me the story about going to the Russians, and he would go to these different countries and on behalf of Claiborne Pell, because Claiborne Pell wasn't so much into UFOs. He was into paranormal phenomena, psychic phenomena, all this kind of stuff. And so he would go to these different countries, and he told me that he at one point was negotiating with the Russians for a piece of alien tissue, and it fell through. And then he talked about going to the Chinese. He tells the story. He goes to the Chinese, and because the way the American government works is you have these different branches of government, and the Chinese didn't understand this. In China, there is only one branch of government. You're either working for the government or you're not working for the government. So they said to him, well, what is the government? What is the American position? And he said, well, I really don't know. I'm working for Claiborne Pell. It's not the government. And they said, well, you're working for the government. And he said, no, I'm not working for the government. I'm working for Claiborne Pell. And they couldn't get this through their head. So he asked, so he's dealing with high-level officials, like people right in the top echelon of power in China, and because everybody works for the government there. And he says, okay, why don't you disclose? Why don't you beat the Americans to it? And the answer, according to Scott Jones, the Chinese looked at him and said, when the Americans disclose, we'll be a close second. And that's what I think it comes down to, is the thing is everybody wants everybody else to disclose before they do, because it's a game of technology. What does the other people know? And everybody hides their stuff. And then you have these situations, as I said, countries that get controlled. There's a story I tell. I did the Clinton book on UFOs. And one of the stories I tell is about Secretary, his name's going to escape me, this Secretary of State under Clinton goes to Virginia, Brazil. He goes to Brazil a couple of weeks after the Virginia crash. Now, this is where the crash is, and they've got these live aliens and all this kind of stuff. And there's all these rumored reports that the American NASA and American officials suddenly show up in the country to get the craft and the bodies. And the story from the Brazilians, that's always been the story, is that this is what happened, and that this Warren Christopher.
Oh,
Warren Christopher.
I was thinking Madeleine Albright, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, so Warren Christopher appears a couple of weeks after, and the head of NASA appears a couple of weeks after on, as they've got other sort of excuses why they're there, but they suddenly appear. And the Brazilian story is always that the negotiation was that they would get, support from the United States if they handed over the craft and the beings, and the fact that they would put somebody on the space shuttle. And sure enough, that's one of the things that happened. They put a Brazilian on the space shuttle. So whether the Brazilians are wrong, but if you listen to the Brazilian researchers, they will maintain absolutely that there was negotiation, that the Americans moved in there immediately, the same as there was a crash in 1978 on the Bolivian border that Bob Pratt was doing with the National Enquirer. And there was the same stories that Bob Pratt was telling me, because I was active at that time with the National Enquirer, that the Americans appeared there right away. So you have, you can give them financial thing. These countries need this kind of stuff, or American support. You can offer them all this kind of stuff in exchange for this kind of stuff. So I think you have these hemispheres where the Chinese control a lot of countries. They control this material. The Russians control a lot of material, and the Americans control a lot of the material.
Wow. I have a bunch of questions that came in from email. This one I had to cut down a little bit. Came in from Kerry. He wanted to know, do you think, depending on which president is in office at the time, by way of his or possibly the future her, character limits what information they get told about UFOs?
No, I used to believe that. I used to lecture, and actually on my website, most of the stuff on my website is wrong, because I said, the president doesn't know. I said, I used to tell the story that the Democrats were not told and the Republicans were told, because the Republicans have a closer tie to the military. And I no longer believe that. And I have in my book, I put an appendix where I say, well, if you believe that certain presidents are told certain things, then you got to start explaining this. And I go to the Adamski story that Kennedy was given access to the aliens. I tell the story that Tim Good tells, and Tim Good's a pretty reliable source, that he talked to the head of Air Force One about Kennedy being flown to Florida to see bodies, and Nixon showing Jackie Gleason the body, Nixon having alien photographs in his filing cabinet, Jimmy Carter telling Shirley MacLaine, yes, there were occupants. Why should we be the only people in the universe? I wanted to what did he call it? I wanted to expose it to the people to see how they would react, but I couldn't and wouldn't. And so you have all these different things where almost every president, or secret stuff, where I had a guy phone me one time and say, have you got Jimmy Carter's phone number? And I said, what do you mean I got Jimmy Carter's phone number? This is a high-level guy that's connected to, I don't want to say who the scientist is, but you know the scientist, and he works for him. And he said, because there's this whole story about the Holloman Air Force Base film. They were trying to track down the Holloman Air Force Base film, and I was very much involved in that story. So he said, we got Jimmy Carter's phone number, because there was a story that Jimmy Carter, one of his Secret Service guys, had said that part of the briefing, he was in the briefing for Carter, and he was shown a 15-minute color film of a landing at Holloman Air Force Base. And so this scientist, this PhD astrophysicist guy, phones me up and says, you got Jimmy Carter's phone number? And I said, well, no, I'm a Canadian. Why would I have Jimmy Carter's phone number? I don't have Jimmy Carter's phone number. And I said, well, what do you want his phone number for? He said, well, I just talked to Bush and I talked to Ford about the Holloman Air Force Base film. And of course, the Holloman Air Force Base film, depending whether you listen to the counterintelligence or the guys who actually got the original material, was that either in 1971 or in 1964, aliens landed Holloman Air Force Base Holloman Air Force Base. The craft landed, these aliens got out, there was an interaction, the craft was put in a hangar, and they had the number of the hangar and the address on the base and all this kind of stuff. And so what they're trying to do is confirm this story. And what he told me they all belong to this foreign intelligence group, and I can't remember what the name of the group is, but that's how he got to these people. So Ford and Bush Senior both belong to this group. So he got a hold of them and he asked Ford. He said, "Did you see the Holloman Air Force Base film during your briefing?" And Ford says, "Yes, I saw it." And he said, well, was it an A-12? Because there's all this stuff like Coleman and people putting out, oh, it was an A-12, or it was a psychological film that was to test the troops and stuff like that. So he asked him, he says, was it an A-12? No. Was it a psychological film? No. And he said, well, when was the briefing? And the briefing, I say, is always the key thing. He said to Ford, when was the briefing? And he said, I'm not going there. Don't even bother to ask. Because if you get the briefing, you get the date of the briefing and who was in the briefing, then you can start to dig for the documents. He said, I'm not even going to go there. He asked Bush Senior, did you see the briefing, the Holloman Air Force Base film? He said, yes, I saw it, but not in my presidential briefing. I saw it as CIA director. So you have these stories, and I have an appendix that shows all these different things. And it comes down to this constitutional argument that you can't say, you got to realize how government works. There's lots and lots and lots of people in the government, and they're all honest people who are just trying to, they may be deluded, totally deluded, but they actually think they're saving the world. And they're all trying to do this sort of stuff. So if you have, for example, from the Eisenhower going to the Kennedy administration, when you have the UFO thing, you got a lot of people involved in this whole situation in NSA and, intelligence and all these different things. How do you suddenly turn all these people and say, okay, our administration is leaving. All you people are no longer allowed to tell the next president what's going on. It is not that easy to stop this thing from rolling. You can see in the American government that once something gets into policy, once things start rolling, there's no way you're going to turn it around. It's like set in stone. And that's what happens, is that everybody is going to say the same thing, that the next president needs to know as much as possible, and we give him them as much material as possible, and they all believe that the president is this constitutional. He's like a monarch. He rules the world. We can't, argue with the president. He can drop the nuclear bombs if he wants. He can do whatever. He's got this ultimate power, and everybody salutes to the president, because if you say you're the military and you decide, going from the Eisenhower administration to the Kennedy administration, you decide, I'm not going to tell the president, and then he calls you in and says, okay, what's the story? And you say, you don't have the need to know, Mr. President. He says, okay, thank you very much. The guy leaves. You phone the head of his boss and you say, okay, I want his resignation on my desk at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I want his boss in here. The president can fire anybody he wants. The president does not even have a security clearance, which is one of the biggest things people make a mistake about. People think that the security thing is run by law. I didn't realize this until in the last year. I didn't realize this. It's not run by law. There was no laws to run this thing. All security, all the classifications, all the need to knows, all the code words, all that is run out of the executive office of the president. The president is in charge of all security, all clearances. Everything is run. You can take a look. You take a look at Roosevelt was the first, 1940. He created confidential and secret. Truman added top secret. Eisenhower added clearances for national security information, and they built on this. And even Bill Clinton, you take 1993, I think all the contractor stuff that was under Bill Clinton, all the contractor security type stuff. So if you've got a clearance, it's run out of the executive office of the president. And that, when you start going back, you start to see how this thing all fits together. That the original MJ-12 document that's very controversial, in there it says it's a classified executive order, which means it's run out of the president. So you can't say, if you hear these people who say, oh, I've got a clearance 15 levels above the president, you tell them, you're full of it, man. The president does not have a security clearance. You can look, you can Google search, it'll be confirmed by all the different people who know this stuff. The president does not have a security clearance, none whatsoever. He can see whatever he wants. He can look over there. Everybody else is under him and has a security clearance. So the president has to know. He has to be in charge of this whole thing. And the idea is that some presidents are told, and some president, it's nice in theory, but it doesn't. You start looking at it, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. That you can suddenly cut him out, because if you can cut the president out, you say, Mr. President, you don't have a need to know for this, and the president's stupid enough to go along with that. Well, then you say, well, he doesn't have a need to know about what's going on in Afghanistan. He doesn't have a need to know about this. Or they say, for example, they'll say, oh, the president, we want to protect the president. So we tell them, we're not going to tell you, Mr. President, because we want to protect you. Then they say, okay, well, we don't want him to know about the Iraq war. We don't want him to know about the economy. And you could protect the president and not tell him anything, and then he's totally protected. That's the whole deal. The buck stops at the president. The president is the guy who has to take responsibility for everything, and anything that happens under him, you can say, well, the president didn't know, but he's still going to go down. If you suddenly say, okay, it was the CIA, it was running the thing, and the president didn't know, the president's still going down. He's still in Constitution. He's still the guy who's actually responsible for everything.
Wow. Okay, just to let the listener know, in hour 2, we're going to get into you're going to be talking about the key to understanding the UFO mystery, the role of consciousness, and why you don't follow UFO reports, all kinds of things like that. But so that kind of wraps it up for hour 1 of this show. And we're not going into a break or anything, but I just thought I would let you know that. And let's see, we have a bunch of questions here, and one of them is, what can you tell us about the continuity of government operation at Mount Weather, and if there seems to be any connection between that and UFOs?
Okay, that's an extremely important thing, and that goes to the same idea. Does the president know? This goes back, an article I wrote. It's on my, I think it's on my my blog site. If you Google search White House UFO and blog, it will pop up my blog site. The article is there. It got huge hits. Huge number of people wrote this thing. And what it comes from is a story that was told by Paul Hellyer a couple months back. And I've known Paul longer than anybody in the UFO field. I was chasing Paul around in the 1970s. And Paul tells this story. we're at you had the citizens hearing in the United States. In Canada, we ran Victor Vigiani set up a similar type thing. instead of senators and congressmen, they had reporters and people doing PhDs in university. And it was a panel. So there was a panel of us. There was Dolan and myself and Stanton Friedman and Paul Hellyer, and then all these reporters on the other side. And they would ask these questions, and it was jammed. I don't know how many people, 400 people in the room, and piles of cameras, and it was really big, way bigger than Citizens Hearing. And so anyway, I'm sitting right beside Paul Hellyer. And I know a few interesting stories I can tell about Paul Hellyer and what he knew and what he didn't know. But Paul Hellyer starts telling this story. And first of all, they ask him, they say, well, who's briefed in Canada? Who do you think knows? And he said the head of the Privy Council, and he's mentioning, but he's guessing. He's saying, well, I think, that probably these people and whatever. And then later on, he's asked another question, and that's when he adds this thing. He says, well, I'd like to add one that gets the briefing. And he said, he tells his story. I get a phone call from an Air Force buddy. I think it was an Air Force buddy of his. And this guy says, the former head of emergency management in Canada is dying of Lou Gehrig's disease. He's got ALS. And he's got something he wants to get off his chest about UFOs. And he's decided you're the guy he wants to tell it to. So Paul says, okay, fine. So Paul doesn't go. Then the Air Force guy phones him back again. He says, he's about to go off the cliff. You better talk to him. So Paul phones this guy up. And the guy says, I just want to let you know, I was taken to Langley and I was given a briefing. And this thing's for real. I was given a briefing and I was made to sign all these papers. And I was taken to Area 51 and I actually got to go inside a craft. I walked around inside a craft. And he said, I'm dying. I want this on the record. And so Paul tells this story, and he doesn't say who the guy is. But it's a very important story, is the fact that if the head of emergency management in Canada, not even the United States, like some foreign power, if the CIA is bringing in the head of emergency management in Canada and they're telling him what's going on, it makes no sense to say they're telling the Canadians what's going on, but they're not telling the president. This is nuts. The only reason this all fits together is that the head of emergency management is the guy who would have to know. And that's what it comes down to. When you look at this thing, you say, who really needs to know? If you don't need to know, they don't tell you. But if you're the head of emergency management, you need to know. Because if the thing goes south, if something crashes and you can't control the story, if you're going to do a disclosure thing and you're going to suddenly say it's for real, a lot of things are going to go south. I wrote an article called The 64 Reasons I Decided Not to Tell You the Truth. It's on my website. It's called something else, but it's in the article section. And I go through and I say, if you actually realize what's going on and you realize the briefing, you do exactly what they're doing, because there's a lot of stuff that can really get ugly. And Stephen Greer started the one, and it's true. The stock market could melt down. You do not need 100% of people to panic. You need a couple of people with a pile of stock and owning oil stock or something who realize this is going to go, and they're going to short sell their stock. And that stock is going to be $100, and it's going to be opening at 10 and heading for 0. And once those guys sell, everybody else is going to sell. Now, if I'm doing the briefing and I say, Martin, okay, this may not happen, but we don't know for sure. This may happen. And the president goes, oh shit, I don't want to be in front of that. I mean, well, hang on, well, let's think this thing over, because you don't know. And it's uncertainty. And if you're in politics, you don't want to do anything that's uncertain. You want to make sure that it's, especially for the president, you want the president to look like a fool that this thing all starts going south. There's a lot of things that could go wrong. So emergency management is the guy who has to know, because things will start to go bad. I mean, you can have riots, you can have all sorts, who knows what's going to happen. And so they have to have a plan. Even if they don't believe in UFOs, they have to have a plan. What if aliens do come here? We don't believe aliens are coming, but what happens if aliens do come and suddenly land on the White House lawn? What are we going to do? What kind of plan? We got to put money into the banks to stop the banks from melting down. We got to do something with the stock market. Because the key with the stock market is, when 9/11 happened, we shut the stock market down for 3 or 4 days or whatever it was. And the only reason I maintain they could open the stock market again is because they were able to convince the people that they were able to do something about it. And what they said was, if anybody stands up on a plane and tries to hijack the plane, we're going to have marshals on the plane and we're going to shoot them. And everybody goes, oh, okay, they got it under control. They've done something. But if it's the UFO thing, And if you don't have control of this thing, what are you going to do? How are you going to open the stock market again? If it starts to melt down, then what do? You got to convince the people you've got this thing under control, but they don't have it under control. The aliens are running the show. And so that's the kind of the scenario that you have to avoid. And the emergency management guy has to be in charge of this thing. And I knew this was very important. When Paul told the story, I was going, wow, because I had done a story. If you go to my presidential UFO site, I had done a story on Johnson. I'd gone to the Johnson administration. And I looked when I did all the presidents. I would do each president. I would see which crash happened during the president. Where was the president when the crash took place? Who appeared at the White House or wherever it was? So Johnson had the Kecksburg crash in December of 1965. The Kecksburg crash occurred. So I went to the Johnson library and I started looking at all the documents, the daily schedule. Where was the president? Where was the Secretary of Defense? Where was the head of NASA and all this kind of stuff? And what I found out with that was that the morning after the crash at the Kecksburg, the president was at the ranch, Austin. He was at his vacation ranch in Austin, recovering from an operation or something. And the next morning, the entire Joint Chiefs of Staff showed up. The head of NASA showed up. The governor of Pennsylvania showed up. The head of Defense Department showed up. Everybody that was anybody that would have been involved in that crash, especially the NASA guy, head of NASA, they all showed up at the ranch. And the meeting said Vietnam War meeting, but they can change those kind of things. And so I was looking at that whole thing. And the key to this was that there was a lot of evidence when I started looking at the records around the Kecksburg crash and the president that showed that the president was involved. One of them was the day he comes back from the ranch, one of the first meetings he has in the White House is with the head of FEMA. The FEMA is emergency management. It's the American equivalent of the guy that Paul Haler is talking about in Canada. So when the Kecksburg crash happens, he has a meeting with the head of FEMA. The very first meeting he has, or the second meeting or whatever, but the same day he comes back to the White House, he has this meeting with FEMA. The other thing I found out, when you look at the Blue Book files on the Kecksburg crash, and we discovered this sort of by accident, if you look at the files on the Kecksburg crash, they have another name. They don't have Kecksburg. It's another name. You have all these reports and stuff. And one of them is a guy by the name of Bourassa. And Bourassa puts a message on there that there's been some metal recovered, I think with Michigan, I think. And in the Blue Book file, it says code bluegrass. And I never knew what this was until years later. I started to look after I came back from the Johnson administration. I find out what bluegrass is. Bluegrass is Mount Weather. Bluegrass is the code name for the place where the president goes if there's a nuclear attack. And it's the head of FEMA. This is the key, especially in the old days. This was the key place because what you need is if the president goes there, you have to have all the communication network to deal with everybody. Foreign embassies, Joint Chiefs of Staff. So you have all these communications that go everywhere in the world. And at FEMA, at Mount Weather, you have access to every agency, every government agency, every foreign power and stuff like that. So that's why it's so powerful. And Bourassa ran Mount Weather. So Bourassa, on the night of the Kecksburg crash, the guy that's running the Mount Weather, who has all the communication network, is putting this message that there's been a recovery of metal in Michigan. And when I saw that, then I went and I looked at Bourassa. And I this guy ran this whole thing for many, many years. And the other story I knew, I'd done the interview. I don't think I've ever made it public. I did an interview with Steven Lufkin. Steven Lufkin was one of the controversial witnesses for Stephen Greer. And he claimed to be this general guy who was a lawyer who had worked for Eisenhower and claimed that he had been with Eisenhower and Eisenhower was doodling UFOs and all this kind of stuff. I knew, because I had interviewed him, I knew that he had said that the UFO thing was being run out of Mount Weather. And I asked him, I said, well, how do you know that? And I was confronting him. I was saying, how do you know that Mount Weather was the place where they were monitoring UFOs and stuff like that? They had like tracking UFOs and stuff like that. And he said, some guy told me, and he didn't mention who the guy was, but this guy told me that this is where this happens and that he had actually heard Eisenhower. He'd seen Eisenhower a couple times at Mount Weather, and Mount Weather's a high security place. You need a top secret security clearance just to get in the place. So all these things sort of fit together that FEMA is running the whole show, and that's what you need. FEMA guy, whether you believe in UFOs, aliens, whatever, you'd have to believe that this guy. And then one of the other pieces of evidence I had was that the FEMA manual, this was a story that most people have covered, that FEMA puts out a manual to firefighters. And they have, I think it's chapter 13, how to deal with a UFO recovery of a craft. And they actually have this chapter in this manual, FEMA manual, on what to do if a UFO crashes. And they go through the whole thing, don't touch, and there could be, radiation, there could be, viruses and stuff. And they go through the whole thing. And then I think they pulled it out of the manual once it got exposed that this was there. So you see this kind of stuff that it makes sense that FEMA knows, the Canadians are told, so the president has to know, and that there is a plan. And I absolutely believe there is a plan in action that for all sorts of scenarios, all sorts of possibilities, because that's the way it works. That's would make sense.
Wow. Now I'm going to ask you, we're going to take a real jag right here. I'm going to ask you, because I've heard you talk about this before, and we have someone in the chat room that follows the Moody Blues. So I wanted to ask you, you knew something about the Moody Blues, and I think I heard you mention something about them. Can you talk about that?
The Moody Blues were big time into UFOs. There's no doubt about it. They tell a few interesting stories. They were good friends with Jim Talatoso. If you ever have a chance to interview him, make sure you ask him about the Moody Blues. He did some work with them and knew them fairly well. And when they came to Phoenix, the Moody Blues, they'd always go to Jim Daltoso and get the latest on UFOs. The reason they were interested in UFOs was that, and this is very open, it was in Flying Saucer Review, I think they covered this story. 1967, they are doing a concert in Manchester, England, and they're going back into London, and Mike Pinder, who was the lead singer for the Moody Blues, was very much into UFOs. He'd had UFO sightings as a kid. He was very open about the fact he'd had sightings as a kid. He's sitting there in the back seat, and they're driving, and he sees this object, which he thought was a communication tower, red light on a top of a tower, and he's watching it, and it's still there, and then he points it out to the other guys, and they're all sort of watching it, and then they pull off the motorway, and the thing lands off on the other side of the motorway in the forest. And that's all they remember. And the next thing they know, they're back in London, and they've been missing 3 hours. And one of the guys, Graham, I think was the guy, actually drew what he believed was the alien, that they'd had this. And they all basically are pretty open about the fact that, yeah, they may have been abducted that night, that this actually did happen. And I actually had a guy, there's another one now, a guy by the name of Steve Boucher, who was in a band in Canada. I tracked this guy for years, and I was trying to find this band because I'd heard another band had been abducted, the entire band in Canada out of St. Catharines, Ontario. And this had been written up in a UFO journal back in the 80s. And then I'm in Brantford a couple months ago, and suddenly this guy's, we're in sort of one of these experiencer group things, and this guy stands up and starts telling the story. And I'm going, this sounds familiar. And I'm suddenly realized, like, this guy was in this band. And I went to him and said, man, I've been looking for you for years, man. I need to talk to you and give me a business card. And I actually had him on talking to my group in Winnipeg on Skype. And he said the same thing as the Moody Blues. I mean, but he remembered he went through Bud Hopkins regressed him, I think, 3 times, or the person who does Bud Hopkins regressions did him 3 times. Then he went back to Toronto. He had a bunch more regressions, and he clearly tells. I mean, all the band members on the ship, and he's giving them his flute, and the alien actually takes this flute and keeps it. And then he talks about how the entire audience was abducted later on, where a situation where it was abducted. But the Moody Blues is a big band. The Moody Blues was 70 million albums or whatever they sold, and the Moody Blues did a lot of, almost anybody who's into UFOs knows about the Moody Blues and their music, and they're sort of influenced by the music. And they write the song, "The Fastest Way to Travel is with the Mind," or this is through thought. And this is how they fly the UFOs. This is where I get into the consciousness thing. So they talk about that. But the most interesting story they tell is this is a story told by Colin Andrews. And Colin Andrews, because he was very famous doing the crop circle thing, and he was approached by 5 different bands. The Moody Blues was one of them. And he tells the story that the Moody Blues come to him after his lecture, and they say, we want to talk to you. We'd like to take you out for lunch. We got something we want to tell you. So Colin tells the story, and I've got it on tape. Colin tells the story. He goes, and there's Pinder and the lead guitarist for the Moody Blues. And they're having lunch, and Colin says, you can tell these guys are not making up this story. Because it's going back and forth, tell them this, that. And one guy tells a story, and then back and forth. And they tell the story that before they were born, they knew what was going on, that they were in a room with some sort of elder-type people, and they were told, you are going to be musicians. And you're going to go into the world, and you are there to raise consciousness, and you're going to put these lyrics into your songs. And Pinder is on record saying lyrics have been put in songs by forces outside of us. And he's very open about that. But they're telling the story that before they were born, they remember clearly being told this job. And then the lead guitarist says to Pinder, he says, well, tell them how we came back in. Tell them how we came back in the world. Tell them about that black hole. And there was this black hole, that they came through this black hole, and that's how they came into the world. And this gets down to the whole thing with the experiencers, that you have, I don't know what the percentage, but it's a fairly high percentage of experiencers who will maintain they remember before they were born. They remember before they were born that they had volunteered to do this job. This Steve Boucher, who had this band out of St. Catharines, he tells the story about the alien, and he gives me the alien's name, about him not wanting to come. And the alien's trying to talk him into the fact he's got to come to Earth, and he's got this thing he's supposed to do, and all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of people have this thing about before they were born. But the Moody Blues, there's like, I can say, you won't believe me if I tell you I remember before I were born, but the Moody Blues, this is a different story. These are big time guys. And so I've got the book finished. It's now going to editing. I do a whole thing with all the musicians. It's just unbelievable how many are experiencers and how many believed they were part alien. John Denver, for example, believed that he was part alien. He came from the planet Lyra, and he actually writes a song called Spirit that was not released until after he dies. And you will see he's talking about the stars in this constellation of Lyra. And in public, he would say, I often imagine I came from this constellation. The guy that wrote the lyrics for the song, or maybe it was the melody for Spirit, said he believed he was from there. And piles of these different people. The guy who was the head of dub music that made Bob Marley famous, he believed he was an alien. There was piles of them believed they were aliens. There's a pile of them that clearly, head of KISS clearly says he was abducted. John Lennon, every indication we have from John Lennon's sighting was it was not just a sighting. It was very, very bizarre. It had the Oz effect, and he was probably abducted. So you have a real weird connection between aliens and especially rock music. But I guess the Moody Blues is one of the more dramatic. I'll give you another one. John Anderson from Yes, the band Yes, which also sold 50 million albums. He came to Colin Andrews, and he also on a radio show where there was 4 people who he told it off the air. 4 people that I know that were part of that thing when he did the interview. Told them as well. So I can tell the story that John Anderson clearly, he says that all art and music comes from the Pleiades. And the question was, well, how does he know that? Where's he getting this idea from? And he's fairly open that he's had UFO sightings. But what he told Colin Andrews was he was in Las Vegas, Nevada, doing a concert, and that he was staying at Caesar's Palace, and that when he was in his room, an alien came through the wall and gave him information. Now, he's never gone public with that, but I know Colin Andrews and 4 or 5, I think it's 4 people, so 5 people total that he's told that story to in private. So you have this very bizarre connection between aliens and especially rock music stars.
So what's the name of your book that's going to be coming on? Do you have a working title or a finished title?
No, I don't. The first one that's coming out is on inspiration. It's inspired the paranormal world of creativity. So I go through. It started with music. What happened with the music thing? And I say it's pretty funny. My father has been dead for 10 years. My father would be rolling over in his grave if he knew that his son was writing a book on music, because I'm a musical idiot. And I'll say clearly I'm a musical idiot. I have never listened to music. I have bought 2 records in my entire life. I listen to talk radio. I do not listen to, even now I don't listen to music except for the songs, these bizarre songs that were the connections and that I listen to. And some of them I don't even listen to the whole song. I just, okay, this makes sense, the lyrics, that this is part of it. And and I don't play a musical instrument. I've never played. My whole family's musical. I don't play a single musical instrument or anything. And now I'm writing this book on music. But I'm doing the inspiration one. And what happened was no interest in music. And I get a phone call from Chris Bledsoe, who I actually had he was talking to my group last night. And you were talking to Alejandro. And Alejandro was talking about the UFO sighting. Well, the UFO sighting that he's going to talk about happened with Chris Bledsoe. And Chris Bledsoe told that story in detail last night to my group about this, what John's going to talk to Alejandro about. And so Chris Bledsoe has, I'm not going to get into the story. It is the wildest story of all times. Warner Brothers is going to throw $80 million at this story. They were so fast. It's an unbelievable story. But anyway, Chris Bledsoe contacts me by email or phone or something. I've known him for a number of years. I had a bizarre experience with him at his house, and I've known him since about 2012. And he phones me up and he says, I just want to let you know the Guardians, who he calls the people he's dealing with, the aliens, he said, they've told me that the message is in the music. And I go, whatever, who cares, that. And he said, the one song is Kashmir by Led Zeppelin, and that's one of the ones I'm pretty sure.
That song.
And then he says the other one is, and this is the hook. You can see it's almost like this thing is planned. The more I see UFOs, it's like this thing is planned. It's like I'm getting dragged into one thing after another. It's like, I'm not going the right direction, so the aliens pull something on me and drag me back into this thing again. No interest in no interest in music. And he says to me, the other song is by Neil Young, and it's called After the Gold Rush. I said, really? Neil Young? I don't know nothing about music, but I do know that Neil Young, the famous musician, grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. I know that. And I said, Neil Young? Are you kidding me? Neil Young, he's from my city. He's from my city. And I'm looking at the synchronicity of this thing. I'm thinking, this is weird, So I go and look at the lyrics. And if you look at the lyrics for After the Gold Rush, it is, I think there's 39% of all experiencers on board will say they've seen the screen. I ask them, you've seen the screen? Oh yeah, I've seen the screen. And the screen is this thing, or they're told by visions and dreams and stuff. It's this cataclysm, this giant wave that comes over the California coast that a lot of people see, and this catastrophe that if we don't straighten things out, this is what's going to happen. And they show it to young kids, and they impress up people on this environmental message that's coming out from the aliens. And so this song was written by Neil Young in 1968. And the song, when he sings the song, if you look at what he's saying, the last half of the lyrics are that we are treating the world like a gold rush. And when the gold is gone, it's going to become a ghost town. And the silver seeds, the flying saucers, are going to come and take the chosen ones, which is what we now, Yvonne Smith calls abductees, the chosen ones, to another planet. And this is his song. And then you see this bizarre synchronicity where he sings this song with this environmental message, and he's big environmental. He's up in Canada here. He's trying to shut down the oil sands in Canada. He's a huge environmentalist. And that's another tag that almost like he's an experiencer, but I have no proof that he's an experiencer except for this bizarre song that has this experiencer message in it. And then suddenly you see all the people starting to sing this song. What's her name? Now these names are going to escape me. Thom Yorke was one. He sings the song. Thom Yorke sings this song. There's no doubt he's an experiencer. You see this song. The other one that sang it was the guy that was on Santana.
Carlos.
He won the Grammy Award for.
Carlos
Anyway,
Santana is the only one I know.
Well, Carlos Santana. What happened with the Carlos Santana thing was, Carlos Santana doesn't get his, like you have people are claiming they're getting it from aliens. Then you get people who are getting it through dreams. So I do the dreams, all the artists who got songs through dreams, Nobel Prizes that came through dreams and stuff like that. But Carlos Santana believed he was getting his musical inspiration from an archangel by the name of Metatron. And Metatron falls into the UFO thing a number of times. But anyway, he says he's getting this inspiration. And in 1997, Carlos Santana gets a message that through this channeling thing and says, you haven't put out a major album for 15 years. What we're going to do is we're going to take the top musicians and we're going to link you up with the top musicians and we're going to bring you back onto the airwaves and you're going to give this message to the young children of the world So he says, okay, fine, whatever. And suddenly he says people start phoning him up. Like this guy that's name is escaping me, Eric Clapton phones him up. All these major people phone him up. And they say, we're going to make you famous again. In 2000, he puts out the album called Supernatural. Supernatural sold 30 million albums. It won 8 Grammy Awards. The record. The record is held by Michael Jackson and Carlos Santana for this album. And the people that are on there is Eric Clapton is rumored to be an experiencer. I heard that he'd been to Hopkins and then regressions. His son is Michael Lee Hill. Michael Lee Hill is this guy who's photographing the UFOs. He claims to be the biological son of Clapton. He's photographing these UFOs over the Lake Erie or whatever. He lives in Cleveland, Ohio, where Clapton lives. He has the picture of his mother and Clapton together, and you get these synchronicities where suddenly all these UFO people appear, these experiencers appear with Santana. So one of them is an experiencer, and he sings this song. Then you have the girl that sang Gloria. She was one of the first people to appear on Saturday Night Live, and she believes she's part alien as well. She's the godmother of punk rock. Anyway, she sings the song. All she does is change it. He says he uses 1970s, and she uses the 21st century. She changes a couple of words in there. She sings this environmental song. She sings it all the time.
Laura
so suddenly
Branigan?
you have No.
You sure it was Gloria? Yeah.
Gloria. She was one of the first people on Saturday Night Live.
Okay. Well, I don't want to get stuck on a name.
Anyway, but yeah. You have all these, and the other one that sang this song was Dolly Parton. And Dolly Parton writes a song about abduction. She writes this thing, I'm Gone. I think the song is called I'm Gone. I've been abducted. And it's kind of a joke. You think it's kind of a joke. She actually goes to Neil Young and she says to him, what's the song about? Because her and Linda Ronstadt and somebody else wanted to sing this song after the gold rush. So she says, what's it mean, Neil? What does the song mean? And Neil Young says, I have no idea. I was totally stoned when I wrote the thing. I have no idea. Each verse may mean something different depending upon what I was on. And so he's claiming he doesn't know what these lyrics mean, but if you look at the lyrics, you see this, whoa, it's like this sort of environmental thing, which a lot of them get dragged into. If you look at Sting, you look at Sting, he talks about doing the ayahuasca thing in South America. And he tells in his biography, he tells a story about the fact that he's put in with these alien type, gray type figures, grab him, and he's put in front of this female alien, and he's playing this game of chess, and he knows he has to win this game, and he loses the game, and he suddenly becomes obsessed with the rainforest, and he's put in enough money from the figures I saw to save 42 million acres of rainforest. He puts piles of money, the same as the head of Grateful Dead. He was a big environmentalist. He claimed that he had this abduction experience, and he was putting money into the rainforest. And you have Olivia Newton-John, who had a real close encounter at 15 years old. Her hair was standing up, and she becomes this massive environmentalist and animal rights activist, like major. And you see these. So I put these connections with the animal rights, and then where they're getting the songs, and these download songs are just so, you can't make this stuff up. I'll tell you a bizarre download, which gets not so much into aliens, but this download thing there. People are tapping into this sort of upper whatever. They're pulling it out of nowhere. Bono has a concert. If you see his 2012 concert, he has a thing called the spaceship. And he's in the spaceship thing, and he goes around the world, and he's doing this concert, and he doesn't really talk about UFOs. And then he has this event that he has this above this big huge thing that he's under. You have this sort of a banner thing that runs around with messages and images and stuff. And then suddenly you have this alien comes on the screen above this platform that he's singing, and the alien says, "What time is it? What time is it?" And then all of a sudden this 333 goes across the screen. I couldn't believe it. Like, wow, 333. And then Bono says, time for help. No, end of the world, we need help. And the Bono people interpret it as Jeremiah 333, that it wasn't the 333 that the UFO people believe in. It was Jeremiah 333, which supposedly was one of his favorite passages, was call upon me in the day of trouble and I will deliver thee. So I do like a download. I'll tell you how bizarre this download thing. You just can't make this stuff up. Bono is doing a concert at Wembley Stadium in England. and he can't sleep the night before. He's like me. Before I lecture, lots of times I don't sleep the night before. So he's there and he can't sleep. And he's playing this film called Blue Velvet. And in the film, there's oh shoot. See, I'm not a music. No, I'm going to ruin the whole story here by not sang My Dreams, Mystery Woman. Hang on. This guy's singing this song. Darn, it's ruining the story here. Anyway, in the song that they're singing this guy's song, and he's from Tennessee. He's a country and western type guy. Died in 1990s, and the song was called My Dreams. So he's playing this tape. He can't sleep. He's playing this movie over and over again, and this song comes with this guy singing this song. So he finally goes to sleep. He wakes up, and there's a song in his head, and it's a song that he thinks that this guy should be singing. And he thinks, well, it's just another song that this guy sang. And then he's thinking, well, no, it's a different song. So he goes and and at the sound check at Wembley Stadium before he has the concert, he hang on, I've got it here. Roy Orbison. So Roy Orbison, he says, oh, this is Roy Orbison's song. So he at the sound check, he plays for his band. He plays this song. He said, man, I got this in a dream last night. And he plays this song, and they say, okay, good. And they play the concert. He goes down below into the dressing room, and he's got to finish the song. It came in his head. Knock on the door. Security guard says, Roy Orbison is here. He wants to talk to you. Him and his wife are here, and they want to talk to you. And he goes, really? He's here? And so Roy Orbison comes in, and he says, you know, I loved your concert. I loved it. I'd like to play with you guys. Have you got a song I can do? Roy Orbison says, yeah, in fact, I just got one this morning, and I thought it was for you. So he gives him this song, and it was called Mystery Woman. It was number 5 in the United States, number 2 in Great Britain. So I go a whole chapter of these. Just you can't make this stuff up. It's songs of where these songs come from that you think you know the song, and you don't know the real song behind it. And it's this download thing. It's this almost like what the Moody Blues are talking about, that they were given this stuff, that a lot of the stuff that's in their albums and their songs was given by somebody else.
Wow, interesting. So someone wanted to know up on the message board, do you think there's a connection between UFOs and synchronicity?
Oh, absolutely. It's all connected. I say there's a book written by Stephen King, who actually got a lot of his books came through lucid dreaming. A lot of people use lucid dreaming to tap into this. He has an expression in there, SSDD. So when I talk about it, I say, that's how it works. It's SSDD. Same shit, different day. It's all the same thing. What it is shutting down the left brain. You have a rational analytical brain that we think is in charge of giving us new ideas and stuff. It's not. There are no good ideas come out of the rational analytical brain. It's all coming out of the subconscious mind. And I even have the top neurologist in the United States is Nancy Andreasen, who's working on creativity. And she says there's a strong relationship between creativity and the unconscious processes, that we think up, that we're analyzing it, we're rationalizing it, we're coming to a conclusion. No, it's all tapping into this thing. So whether you're doing meditation or whether you're doing psychic phenomena, we like to parse all this stuff. We say, for example, experiencers will tell me, okay, I'm getting my messages, like 42% of all experiencers claim to get downloads of mathematics, inventions. 42% are getting downloads. And they'll say, we're getting real material. Don't lump us with the channelers. We're not channelers. They're all full of it. None of those guys are real. And I say it's all the same thing. It's like tuning into a radio station. If you're doing mediumship, you're tuning into 106.3. If you're doing aliens, they're on 106.4. You're shutting down the left conscious brain that breaks the filter, that stops you from connecting with non-local consciousness, and you're tapping into this kind of stuff. So all that kind of stuff. I'll give you an example of synchronicity. How there's a guy who's abducted out of Las Vegas. and he tells the story of waking up one morning with this song in his head. And he's a musician, and he wakes up with a song in his head, and then he goes to the truck and he plays, and he turns on the radio, and this song is playing. And he's going like, wow, I mean, what's the chances of that? And I say, well, you believe in time and space, and there is no time and space. If you look at Einstein and stuff like that, if you go to some of the latest theories, this whole idea that there is no time and space, that everything is lumped on top of each other, and that time and space are illusions, then you start to see that the unconscious mind can tap in, and it knows what the first song is going to be. And so it transfers it over through the dream process into the person's mind, and then the person goes and plays it, and it plays, and he thinks, well, this is unusual because they're believing that there's actual time, that time moves like a linear clock, and therefore this can't happen. But if you don't have time, and if the unconscious has the access to all this material and just transfers over to the conscious mind gets confused because it has a different impression. So you have to have this whole idea of getting the fundamentals of the universe, and that's where I think we're going wrong, is that we're doing equations to understand the UFO phenomena, and we've got all the wrong numbers to start. And you're never going to get the right answer unless you got the right answers, or the right numbers to put into the equation. And so when it comes to the consciousness thing, when it comes down to reality, if you look at the modern quantum physics stuff that nobody wants to talk about, this whole idea about the entangled particle experiment, that the major guys that came up with this, Niels Bohr and Heisenberg and all these guys, basically came to this conclusion that consciousness is primary. That consciousness, that a particle does not take a position in time and space until there's an observer. And this whole idea that consciousness is primary. So if you have consciousness being primary, then you start looking at this thing with time and space. Is consciousness local, where we have separate objects and moves linearly, or is it non-local? And if you listen to Russell Targ, who's the guy who ran the remote viewing program with Hal Puthoff for the CIA for years and years and years, every time he's interviewed, he tells this story about consciousness, about remote viewing. It is as easy to remote view in the past and the future as it is in the present. It is as easy to remote view on the other side of the planet as it is in the next room, which means that consciousness is not governed by time and space. So when you get that down properly, then you start to understand, how do they get here? Because you're not going to be flying through time and space, or through taking 10,000 years. That's the major argument by the skeptics, that you can't get here from there. The distances are too vast. You can't go past the speed of light, all that kind of nonsense. But if you look at the entangled particle experiment, and you see that these particles, one is on one side of the universe, one's on the other side of the universe, and if you affect one, the other one knows what you're doing, which means that it's conscious. It's aware of what you're doing. So you have this consciousness at this particle level. And if particles can transfer messages through time and space with no time, then maybe the aliens just understand how this works and they're moving through. And when you start talking to experiencers, that's what they're told, that this is how it works. And then you get the even more important part is that we make the mistake that's a physical world. And when you go back to this original quantum thing, with the entangled particle thing, or with the dual slit experiment, where the consciousness breaks down the wave, you have this whole idea that a particle does not take a position in time and space until there's an observer. You remove the observer, it goes back to a wave.
That's right.
Put the observer on, it goes back to a particle. So particles are governed by consciousness. And then when you start talking to experiencers, and I had Chris Bledsoe last night tell the story. He's one of 36 people that I've talked. Well, I haven't talked to them all, but I've got documented from, and there's maybe 6 or 7 when I've actually talked to, when they say, we know now that 14% of all experiencers, according to the free survey, say that they've flown the craft. And I've known this since 2013, when this woman floored me in Phoenix, Arizona, and told she was flying the craft. And I said, you are what? I couldn't believe it. I've been 37 years. And I said, you're flying the craft? Are you kidding me? She said,
yeah. Like piloting the craft?
Piloting the flight, yeah. 14% of all experiencers, according to the free survey, have flown the craft.
Never heard that. Wow.
Well, and so when I'd never heard it either. And when she told me this, I said, you flew the craft. I couldn't figure. And first they'd set this meeting up with me. I'd done a consciousness lecture. And they'd set me and said, are you going to talk to Pam? And I said, yeah, okay. And I thought, well, I'd agreed to talk to her or whatever. So she comes and it's a big secret meeting or whatever. She's telling me about remote viewing, and I didn't heard all this stuff, and I'm ignoring her. I'm not really paying attention. And when she said this thing about she'd flown the craft, I went, and she's in her 70s. I said, you've flown the craft? And she said, yeah, I've flown the craft. And I said, well, how do you fly a craft? And she said, you do it with your mind. As soon as she said that, it clicked why they set me up with this woman. And now, so I have all these people who suddenly say they're flying the craft, and it's usually women. So when they say, oh, I have an idea, I'm flying the craft or whatever, I'll stop them and say, hang on, I want to ask you a question. How do you fly the craft? Nobody. Absolutely. It's 100%. Nobody has said anything different. They all said the same thing. You do it with your mind. So when Chris Bledsoe's on last night, I talked to him a number of times. I actually put on tape a couple of times. I said, Chris, you've flown the craft. You flew it. He said, oh, I've flown it a number of times. I said, okay, tell us, how do you fly a craft? What actually happens? And he goes through the whole procedure. Start and getting on the craft, exactly this beehive type thing. You put your hand on it. Same as Susie Hansen from New Zealand will tell the same story. You put your hand on this thing, and then suddenly everything starts to move, and there's these hexagons moving in the wall and stuff like that. And suddenly the thing opens up, and you can see glass, and you're actually using your mind to fly the craft. Or what's her name? The assistant for Kathy Martin. She talks about this, where she's actually
Denise
talking
Stoner.
to the Denise Stoner. Denise Stoner talks about the fact that she's talking to the actual mind of the machine, that she's under in the craft and showing how it works, and that the engine type thing is actually alive and it's communicating with other crafts. And she felt sorry for it because it was and this whole idea that the craft is alive. And so when you come down to the disclosure thing, this is maybe what it'd be about. This has got nothing to do with physical. This is not like you're going to pull this little engine out of the little free energy engine and stick it in your SUV and drive around for the next 30 years for nothing. It's got nothing to do with the free energy. It's got to do with this whole thing, that this is mind aspect to this whole thing. And so when you even take a look back at the Roswell thing, we used to think that there was 4 dead aliens at Roswell. A lot of witnesses are saying, no, it was 3 dead and 1 live alien. So assuming that this is right, take a look back and review, you're recovering the Roswell crash and there's this live alien. And the people who have claimed to have the live alien are all telling the same story, that the thing was talking in their heads. So if you're in 1947 and it's after the war and it's all military and stuff like that, you suddenly get an alien who's talking in your head, you go like, wow, forget about what the craft is built of. Like, wow, man, if we could develop this technology. And I give you the proof of how we support for this. I have this download experience in 2012, which I won't get into. One of the items that was downloaded into my head, I had all the material, but all it did was put all the material together. It was like, here's how it fits together. And it came with absolute certainty. You don't have to check this. You do not. And anybody who's had these downloads, and I've got Nobel Prize winners who talk about this, it comes with this absolute certainty. You don't have to check it. This is for real. And it usually is real. And it's always real. So anyway, one of the things that came into my head, I had chased the Canadian government, and the famous top secret memo from 1950. The Canadians go to the Americans. Wilbur Smith goes through classified channels, which is important. He's going through classified channels. This is a top secret memo. Canadian government does not deny this document exists. They do not deny anything about it. He says to the Americans what's going on with flying saucers. Through classified channel, the information comes back. Flying saucers exist. It's the most highly classified subject in the United States. It's of tremendous significance to the Americans. A small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush running the thing. And that what popped in my head during this download was the very next line. We were also told by American officials that other things might be associated with the flying saucers, such as mental phenomena. And the Americans aren't doing very well because they've said if we're working on the program, they're willing to exchange credentials and talk to us. The key to that is this is November of 1950. George Adamski would not come forward until a couple of days after the detonation of the hydrogen bomb. Nobody was talking to aliens. Betty and Barney Hills would not become public till the mid-1960s. There was no reports in 1950 of people talking to aliens, let alone aliens being telepathic. So the question is, how did the Americans know to tell the Canadians that mental phenomena was part of the UFO phenomena back in 1950? Because they recovered a live alien at Roswell, and they knew mental phenomena was a key part of this whole phenomena. So you can see it right at the beginning. They've known right from the beginning. And that may be one of the key things that's causing the security. behind this thing is this mental phenomena, and the fact that it's all controlled. And I even show an experiment when I lecture on this. I say, if you don't think that this is important and they're not doing this, take a look at this. And I show this video. All you have to do is Google search F-22 and rat, and this experiment will pop up. And this came from following a UFO case. I won't get into it, but it ends up at this lab in University of Southern Florida. And they're running this experiment. And what they do is we have 100 billion neurons in our brain. They take 20,000 neurons from a rat brain. They put it in a little tiny petri dish that has wires attached to the bottom of it. And they wire it into an F-22 simulator. And I did a lecture. I actually had George Filer in one of my lectures. And I always ask, how many people can fly an F-22 simulator? Nobody can ever. Nope, no hands ever go out. I said to George, is it hard to fly an F-22 simulator? He said, yeah, it'd be hard to fly an F-22 simulator. So they take these 20,000 neurons, they put the wires in there, and what they do is when the nose of the plane goes down, they send a high frequency signal to these neurons, and the neurons send a signal back. And what they do is they leave it for 3 days, and on this video you'll see it shows, and all the neurons aren't talking. There's nothing happening, and after 1 day, they start to talk. 2 days, they were talking. And after 3 days, it's like a brain. There's all these signals, and the brain is, all these neurons are talking with each other. And they control it. Then from side to side, they control it. And so this 20,000 neurons of a rat brain is flying the F-22 simulator. And then they change the weather. You see on the video, they change the weather, and it's like high, thunderstorms and wind and stuff like this. And it continues to fly the simulator. And that comes down to the symbiotic thing. Can you get a pilot to fly a craft, a plane with your mind? They're working on it. This is white world technology 2004. You can imagine what they're doing in the black world. Wow.
Okay. One of the questions I wanted, someone on the message board wanted to know if you, and just real quickly on this, if you would, because I want to shift gears here for in just a minute. But did you vet these people that claimed they flew the craft, and how did you feel like they were telling the truth?
Well, absolutely. I mean, how do you vet them? I mean, as soon as they said, and they'd be telling the story, and they'd be, I flew the craft, and I'd say, stop. How do you fly a craft? I mean, you said you've never heard of this before.
Right?
Yeah. I'd never heard of it in 2013. So who's going to make up, I used my mind? Who's going to make that up? It's the last thing you think about. And as I said, 100%, not 90%. 100% of people all tell the same thing. Yeah. They'll talk about this fact that they're using your mind to fly the craft, and that the craft's alive. And the other thing is, if you take a look, and I asked the free people, because they're going into stage 3 and stage 4, I said, you've got to ask. These are important. This is an important question. These 14% that claim they've flown the craft, that's the question you got to ask them. You got to ask them about how do you fly the craft, and see if you have this 100% thing, because it's hundreds of people that they're talking to that are making this claim. And it's like, why would you even claim you're flying the craft? I mean, because and then the other one is, I'll give you a quick example. The singer, he became a Muslim.
Cat Stevens.
Cat Stevens claims he was abducted. No doubt about it. He was on a rooftop in London. He said they came and they sucked him up into the craft, and then he became a Muslim, didn't really talk about it anymore. He does 2 songs on his abduction experience. One is called Longboats. The other one is called Freezing Steel. He said, I was on the ship of freezing steel, the ship without the guiding wheel. That was written in 1970. And that indicates there is no guiding wheel. They're flying it with their mind. And so this is the critical thing, is for the free people to nail this thing down. The same as, there's all sorts of things they have to nail down that I've sort of discovered, that these weird things that really tell us what's going on. Wow. But you have some other questions, so go ahead.
Oh, yeah. No, I wanted to know what your new revelation regarding one of the Ariel school kids, because I know you sent that to me. I wanted to find out what your thoughts were. Because we only have about 7 minutes or so.
Okay, this is a girl, Trim.
Yeah, Emily Trim. I met her.
Emily Trim. She's going to speak at UFO Congress. She spoke. She came public in Brantford in 2015. I happened to be in the lecture. She's talking about And I always, when I do the consciousness thing, people say, no, it's not consciousness. I mean, these people just think that they're getting messages from aliens, and it's not really true. We know, and they just believe. So they're doing this thing that, and so you have these 62 kids, and in my lectures, I'll bring it up, and I'll say, look at this kid. And these downloads, these kids are all getting these down. They're talking about coming out of the alien's eyes, and they're getting these messages. So Emily Trim comes forward, and she says she and this other girl are on the edge. They're within range of touching these aliens when the aliens appear. They're walking on these logs on the edge of on the playground. And she tells a story that the alien was there and she was looking into the alien's eyes and she got this download and all this stuff was going into her head. And the other girl hers was environmental and the other girl's hers was technology and the other girl's was environmental, these messages. And what she described is something that only I sort of picked up on, is she's talking about and I'm having an interview with her handler. They don't want me to talk to her, but her handler is this guy out of Montreal. And I'm going to talk to him tomorrow. I'm doing this interview. And so the question is, how fast were these images going in her head? And that is because there's a technique that is called the Bankston healing method. It is the one that claims to be the Cadillac to heal cancer. I won't get into it. But what they use, and I was actually trained on this because I was so interested in this whole thing. I was trained. It's called rapid image cycling. It's the ability to cycle thousands of images in your head every second. And they teach you how to do this in these images. So anyway, she's talking rapid image cycling. The key is that the person who taught the rapid image cycling to Bankston, who's now in charge of it, was a medium who later on claimed he was an alien. So that's the one connection. So this alien thing that and the thing is, it's like the flying the ship with your mind. Like, who would think you're going to cure cancer by flipping thousands of images a second in your head? It doesn't make any sense. It's like, where the heck did this come from? So he tells this story. And then when I hear Suzanne Hansen telling the story, Suzanne tells the story. I'm February 2010, and she doesn't know what she's talking about. I mean, I hear this, I go, wow. And I contact her, and she confirms the story. The aliens take her and about 250 people to an underground facility, not a facility, but like an underground lecture theater. And they're all in this room, and the alien comes out, and she says the images start on the screen. And this is environmental images, and it's flash, 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 flash. And she says, and when it was going, she said there was emotion. People were crying. All these images were flashing on the screen. And she said they were going hundreds of times a second, and they had taught us how to do it. That's the Bankston method, which was taught by this guy who claimed to be an alien. And then suddenly you have this Emily Trim coming forward, and she's got these images flashing in her head. So my question now is, how fast were they flashing? Was it 100 images a second? Which doesn't make any sense. Unless you know how they're trained, you say, no, and you can't flash 100 images a second in your head. But Emily Trim is telling this story. And the other one that she tells that's interesting is that she does this thing, and I've done a lot of this, is this download thing, that a lot of experiencers, when they have their encounter, Chris Bledsoe is a prime example. They suddenly, holy cow, I got to paint. Chris Bledsoe's never painted in his life. He's got to go to the arts thing. He's got to buy canvases and paints and stuff. And I have a whole list of experiences who suddenly are able to do art that you cannot believe. As soon as they have their awakening UFO experience. Emily Trim is one. She's got these massive, beautiful paintings that are all related to her experience, and she has this ability, and it's almost like they're given this ability to do this painting. Or the Allagash guys, if you hear their story, they're artists.
I was just going to mention that.
Yeah.
One became a mathematician.
Yeah, but they're doing art with the mathematics involved. Their art all changed as if they're being influenced, and this is sort of like whatever they're doing with the art thing. But there's so many of these people. You can't believe how many of these people have these claims where a caretaker or a janitor out of Ontario, and some of his stuff, I couldn't believe it. He never painted before in his life, and it looks like a professional artist. It was like unbelievable. And I said, really? And this only happened a couple of years ago where he has this awakening experience, and suddenly he can't stop painting. He's painting all the time. And so these are the kind of things that I think that are very interesting that we should be looking at to see what's going on, because there's a lot of these people running around. And we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. Let's see. We just had one more question. I think we'll probably fill up the rest of the time. And could you tell about the deathbed confessions of 2 Canadian officials and what they claim they were shown by American officials related to UFOs?
Well, no, there's only the one. I mentioned the one. This is the one, the emergency management guy who told Hellier the story. the guy who was dying of ALS. But the other one was Wilbur Smith, and I talked to his son. And Wilbur Smith ran the Canadian government program from 1950 to 1954. He was the official, no matter what anybody's got to say. We have records that prove that he was the official running the program. He wasn't reporting to anybody or, taking orders from anybody. He was running the show. And he was a contactee. We never mentioned it for a number of years. He was a contactee. At the end of his life, his son said to him, "Dad, did you see the craft?" And his son told me, I've got a taped interview with him. He said, yeah, his father's dying of lower bowel cancer. He knew he was dying. He was near the end. And he said, there's nothing they can do to me anymore. Yes, I saw the craft. I was shown the craft and I was shown the bodies. And I immediately said to Jim, his son, I said, were they grays? Because there's no gray mentioned back in that time. And he said, no, they were aliens described at the time. People like us that you would, except smaller, but looking like us. So Wilbur Smith confirmed to his son on his deathbed that, yes, he had actually seen the craft outside of Washington, D.C., and he was shown the bodies by the Americans. And he was the Canadian government official that was running it until he claimed there was a flying saucer came over to Washington or over Ottawa, which is the nation's capital, and they shut the program down, and that was the end of the program.
Wow. Okay, one last question here. And why is it that you don't follow UFO sighting reports?
Because we've done it for 70 years, and if you take a look, where are we? Everybody says it's a big mystery. We don't know what's going on. It's not a physical thing. You cannot. I say if we try to measure it, we're never going to figure it out. You got to go to the next step. If you had 3,000 members like MUFON members, if you had the CIA, if you said, okay, instead of a UFO or aliens, it's a Russian plane. If I say to you, okay, Martin, what are we going to do? Everybody go stand out in their backyard for a week and see what they see? Or are we going to listen to the experiencers, the people who claim to have worked inside the Russian space program, claim to have been inside the thing? Now, maybe they're lying, but don't you think it's more a better source of our time and energy to talk to people who actually been a part? Because what can you tell by what you see, what these thousands of people will see in their yard? They'll report this color, this object, and you can't tell anything by stuff flying around the sky. It can always be something else that you're never going to nail it down. The only way you're going to nail it down is to get the government to disclose or to talk to the people who claim to have been inside the ship.
That's right. Okay, we are out of time. Thanks so much. I really do appreciate it. It was very interesting.
Yes. Well, thank you for your interest. I appreciate your listening to my tales.
Yeah, very good. All right, you take care, Grant.
Okay, see you, Martin.
Thank you. All right, everyone, so thanks so much for listening. And next week, we have Frank Jacobs on. He's put together a movie called Packing for Mars. I think it'll be an interesting show. I want to thank a few people. Our guest, of course, Grant Cameron, Alejandro Rojas, however you say that, for the news. I want to thank Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse for the music for the show. And I'm Peggy Shunning for managing the Facebook page. And so that is going to do it for the show this evening. And remember, we'll be back next week, and to keep your eyes to the sky.